The oldest story on Earth did not begin in Europe. It began with an African mother.
Every human being walking this earth right now, every last one of them came out of a black woman in Africa. That is not a theory. That is not a guess. That is the bones talking. And for almost 200 years, Europe knew it and lied about it on purpose. Stand still with that for a second. The professors, the museums, the textbook companies, the men who got knighted for discovering where humans came from, a whole lot of them had the proof sitting in a drawer and chose to tell the world a different story. They drew charts that put Europe at the top and Africa at the bottom. They invented races that do not exist in the blood. They taught generations of children, including ours, that civilization started somewhere up in the cold and trickled down to the rest of us. And the whole time, the oldest human bones ever pulled out of the ground were sitting in a valley in East Africa, telling the opposite story to anybody brave enough to listen. So sit with me for the next hour, because we are going to walk through exactly how that lie got built, who built it, why they built it, and what the dirt finally said when it got tired of being quiet. Let us start in a place called the Awash Valley in Ethiopia. 1974, a young scientist named Donald Johanson is out there digging in the dust, and he finds a piece of bone sticking up out of the ground. He brushes it off, then he finds another piece, then another. By the time the sun went down, he had pulled 40% of a complete human skeleton out of that Ethiopian soil. A woman, 3.5 feet tall, walked upright, had hips like ours, knees like ours, a jaw like ours, and she had been laying in that ground for 3,200,000 years. They named her Lucy, and Lucy was not some half monkey, half person science experiment. Lucy was a person, the oldest, most complete person anybody had ever found. And she was African, black African, from Ethiopia, the same Ethiopia that shows up all through the Bible, the same Ethiopia that had kings and queens when Europe was still living in caves. When the news of Lucy hit the papers, you would think the whole world would have stopped and bowed its head. Instead, you know what happened? The story got buried under footnotes. The headlines played it cool. The textbooks added a paragraph and kept it moving. Because admitting Lucy was admitting something that a whole industry of European scholars has spent 2 centuries trying to deny. Humanity, all of it, started in Africa. And here is the thing. Lucy was just the beginning. After Lucy, they kept digging. They found a skull called Ardi that was 4,400,000 years old. Also Ethiopia. They found bones in Kenya, in Tanzania, in South Africa, in Chad, in Morocco. Every single time, the oldest human or near human remains kept coming out of African dirt. Not one ancient human skeleton older than the African ones has ever been pulled out of European ground. Not one. Europe's oldest bones top out around 45,000 years. Africa's go back millions. There is no contest. There is no debate. There is only the dirt and what the dirt has been saying the whole time. The scientific name for it now is the out of Africa theory, And even that name is a little bit of a cover. Because out of Africa makes it sound like a road trip. The real story is that humanity is African. Period. Some of us walked up north a long time ago, and the sun stopped hitting our skin the same way, and our features shifted over tens of thousands of years. But the original human face, the first mother, the first father, the first child who ever looked up at the stars and wondered something, that was a black face in Africa. Every other face on this planet is a remix of the original. Now, why Africa? Why not anywhere else? Because the conditions were right and nowhere else was even close. Africa had warm, year-round temperatures, which meant our ancestors did not have to spend all their energy just trying to keep from freezing to death. They could think, they could build, they could experiment. Africa had the Great Rift Valley running right down the middle of East Africa, which is a stretch of land where the earth literally split open millions of years ago, creating freshwater lakes, fertile soil, mountains, and grasslands all stacked next to each other. You could not design a better laboratory for life to evolve in. You had water for drinking, fish for eating, grasslands for hunting, forests for shelter, and mountains for protection, all within walking distance. Africa was not just the cradle of humanity. Africa was the only place humanity could have started. The other continents either did not have the right climate, did not have the right resources, or did not even exist in the right shape yet. When you really look at the geology, the question is not why Africa. The question is, where else could it have been? And the answer is nowhere. So when somebody tries to tell you that humanity started somewhere else and migrated down into Africa, ask them which lake those first humans were drinking from. Because the lakes are still there in Ethiopia, and they have been there longer than your great-great-great-great-great-grandmother's grandmother's grandmother. The land remembers what the books refuse to print. And then there is the Dina. This is the part that really shuts the conversation down for anybody still trying to argue. In the 1980s, a group of scientists at Berkeley got their hands on mitochondrial DNA samples from people all over the world. Mitochondrial DNA is special because it only passes down from mother to child. Your mama got hers from her mama, who got hers from her mama, all the way back. It is the mother line, pure and unbroken. So these scientists ran the math. They traced every living woman's mitochondrial DNA back as far as it would go. And every single line, every single one, no matter what country you collected the sample from, traced back to one woman who lived in Africa about 200,000 years ago. They called her mitochondrial Eve. One black African woman is the genetic mother of every human being alive right now. The white lady in Norway, the man in China, the grandma in Ireland, the kids in Australia, everybody. They all carry pieces of her DNA in their cells. They are all walking around with a black African mother's blood in them, whether they know it or not. And when those Berkeley scientists published that paper in 1987, the academic world had a meltdown. Some of them refused to accept it. Some of them tried to discredit the method. Some of them just pretended it did not happen. But the DNA does not care about feelings. The DNA is the DNA. And the DNA says the mother of mankind was a black woman from Africa. And that is the end of that conversation. Now let us back up and look at how Europe built the cover story in the first place, because this is where it gets ugly. Go back to the 1700s, the 1800s, the age when European powers were running around the world, taking land that did not belong to them, enslaving people who did not deserve it, and needing a reason to feel good about themselves while they did it. They could not say out loud, "We are stealing from these people because we are greedy." They needed a story. So they paid their scientists, their philosophers, their preachers, and their school teachers to come up with one. And the story they cooked up went like this. Humanity started somewhere up north, maybe the Caucasus Mountains, maybe somewhere in Central Asia. The lightest skinned people were the original people, the most advanced, the most intelligent, the closest to God. And the darker the skin got, the further you fell down the ladder. They drew actual pictures of this. Charts with white men at the top and black men at the bottom and apes drawn just one step below that. They published these charts in medical journals. They taught them in universities. They put them in the front of children's textbooks. A man named Johann Friedrich Blumenbach in Germany came up with the word Caucasian in 1795 because he thought the most beautiful skull he ever saw belonged to a woman from the Caucasus Mountains. And he decided right then that white people must have started there. No bones, no no evidence, just a feeling he had about a skull. And that nonsense became the foundation of how the world talked about race for the next 200 years. And the worst part, the part that should make your blood pressure rise, is that they had evidence that contradicted all of it sitting right in front of them. European explorers were going into Egypt in the 1700s and 1800s and finding sculptures, paintings, and mummies of dark-skinned African people who had built one of the greatest civilizations in human history thousands of years before Europe could even read and write. What did they do? They chiseled the noses off the statues. They labeled the dark-skinned faces as Nubian servants instead of pharaohs. They wrote in their journals that the Egyptians must have been a light-skinned race that darkened over time. They went down to Great Zimbabwe in southern Africa and found stone cities built without mortar, towers reaching 30 feet into the sky, and they wrote in their reports that Africans could not possibly have built it. So it must have been Phoenicians or Arabs or anybody but the black folks who were still living right there next to it. The cover-up was not subtle. The cover-up was a full-time job. Whole careers were built on it. Whole museums were filled with stolen artifacts that got relabeled to make Africa look like it had nothing to offer. And the men who did it got knighthoods and statues and their names on university buildings. Some of those names are still up there right now while we are sitting here talking. Let me tell you about the skulls, because the skulls are where it gets personal. In the 1800s, a Philadelphia doctor named Samuel Morton started collecting human skulls from all over the world. He had hundreds of them lined up in his office. He would pour mustard seed or lead shot into each skull to measure the volume of the brain that used to sit inside it. Then he would write down a number and rank the races by brain size. Guess who came out on top in his rankings? White Europeans. Guess who came out on the bottom? Africans. He published his findings, and the whole scientific world treated him like a genius. Schools taught his rankings. Politicians used his rankings to justify slavery. Generations of children grew up believing that black people had smaller brains because a man in Philadelphia poured mustard seeds into some skulls and wrote down a biased number. Fast forward to 1988. A scientist named Stephen Jay Gould went back and remeasured Morton's skulls, the originals, the same ones. And you know what he found? Morton had been cheating. He had been picking which skulls to measure, throwing out the ones that did not fit his theory, and squeezing the numbers to make black brains look smaller than they really were. When Gould measured them honestly, the difference disappeared. Brain size was the same across every group. Morton was a fraud. But by the time we found out, his fake science had already poisoned 100 years of education. His rankings had already been used to justify segregation, eugenics, immigration laws, and the Tuskegee experiments. The damage was done. And his skulls are still sitting in a museum in Philadelphia right now in a basement somewhere because nobody has figured out what to do with them. So how did our ancestors actually leave Africa? Because some of us did leave. That part is true. Around 70,000 years ago, give or take, a group of humans walked out of East Africa, crossed the Red Sea at a narrow point near what is now Yemen, and started spreading across the rest of the world. They walked into the Middle East. They walked into India. They walked into Southeast Asia. Some of them got on boats and made it all the way to Australia 60,000 years ago, which is a journey so impressive that scientists still cannot fully explain how they did it with the boats they had. Other groups walked north into Europe and Central Asia, where the cold weather and the lack of sunlight slowly changed their skin over tens of thousands of years. Lighter skin lets in more vitamin D, which you need when the sun does not hit you straight on. So the body's adapted, the hair changed, the eye color shifted, but all of that happened later. The starting point was black. And here is something most people never get told. Even after some of our ancestors left, the people who stayed in Africa kept on living, kept on building, kept on becoming. Africa did not empty out. Africa kept right on going while the rest of the world was just getting started. The people who stayed are the direct unbroken line from Lucy the mitochondrial Eve to the great kingdoms of Kush and Mali and Songhai to the men and women loaded onto ships out of West Africa and brought to these shores in chains. That bloodline never broke. It got stretched across an ocean, but it never broke. So when somebody walks past you in Birmingham or Houston or Atlanta and they got dark skin and full lips and a wide nose, you are looking at the closest living version of the original human face. The face Lucy had, the face mitochondrial Eve had, the face that every other face on this planet is a watered down copy of. Let that sit with you for a second, because the schools sure are not going to tell you. And here is what really turns the whole story on its head. Our ancestors knew all of this before any white man ever stuck a shovel in Ethiopian soil. The Dogon people of Mali had star charts that mapped the orbit of Sirius B, a star you cannot even see with the naked eye, hundreds of years before European astronomers figured out it existed. The Egyptians wrote about a homeland to the south called Punt and treated it like sacred ground because they knew their people came up out of it. The Ethiopians have an oral tradition going back thousands of years that says they are the oldest people on earth, and the bones in their own backyard back them up. African griots in West Africa memorize family lines going back 40, 50, 60 generations, and could recite them out loud at funerals and weddings. Our ancestors knew where they came from. They knew who they were. They did not need a Berkeley laboratory to confirm it. The knowledge was sitting in the songs, in the stories, in the names passed down from grandfather to grandson. What Europe did when it came in with its charts and its calipers and its fake rankings was not discover anything. Europe just papered over a truth that Africans had been carrying for thousands of years and then handed Africans a forged copy and told them to memorize it. And generations of our people, including some of our grandparents, were forced to swallow that forged copy in mission schools and colonial classrooms and segregated public schools where the teacher would smack your hand if you asked too many questions. Now let me tell you something that is going to bother you. A whole lot of the evidence that proves what I am telling you right now is sitting in basement storage rooms in European museums where the public is not allowed to go. The British Museum has somewhere around 8 million objects in its collection. About 1% of them are on display. The other 99% are in vaults. The Berlin Museum has the same situation. The Louvre in Paris, the Vatican. There are wooden masks from Benin sitting in climate-controlled rooms in London right now that were taken at gunpoint in 1897. There are mummies from Sudan sitting in drawers in Berlin. There are bronze sculptures from Ghana sitting in cases in Brussels that have not seen African sunlight in 130 years. And every single one of those objects tells a piece of the story that the textbooks left out. Skulls from ancient North Africa that show the original population was darker than what is there now. Tools from East Africa that prove human technology started in the same valley Lucy was found in. Paintings from inside Egyptian tombs that show the pharaohs with skin tones the color of dark coffee. The receipts are real. The receipts have been collected. The receipts are just locked behind a door in a country that has been refusing to give them back for 100 years. Nigeria has been asking for the Benin bronzes back since the 1960s. Greece has been asking for the Parthenon marbles back since the 1800s. Egypt has been asking for the Rosetta Stone. Ethiopia has been asking for the Magdala treasures. And the answer from London and Paris and Berlin has mostly been some version of, you cannot take care of them as well as we can. Read that sentence twice. The same countries that stole the artifacts at gunpoint are now claiming the original owners are not responsible enough to hold them. That is the cover-up still running in 2026, not in some dusty old textbook. Right now, this week, while we are sitting here. And the cover-up is not just in museums, it is in the way the story gets told on television. Watch any documentary on human origins and count how many times they show you the face of an early human. 9 times out of 10, that face is reconstructed with lighter skin than the science says it should have. The reconstructions of Lucy you see in museums often give her a kind of grayish ape-looking face, when the truth is she would have looked like a small, dark-skinned African woman with features you would recognize. The reconstructions of Cheddar Man, a 10,000-year-old skeleton found in England, finally got done honestly in 2018 and showed that the oldest known Briton had dark brown skin and blue eyes. The British public lost their minds. Newspapers ran headlines questioning whether the scientists got it right. Some people refused to accept it. But the Dina was the Dina. The first people in Britain were dark-skinned. The first people in Spain were dark-skinned. The first people in Germany were dark-skinned. White skin in Europe did not even show up in large numbers until about 8,000 years ago, which in the timeline of humanity is basically yesterday afternoon. For most of human history, every human on Earth had brown or black skin. Light skin is the new arrival. Light skin is the variation. Light skin is the remix. The original recording is black. And somebody owes a whole lot of children an apology for the textbooks they grew up reading. Now bring it home. Bring it all the way home to where we are sitting right now. Every black grandmother in Mississippi who ever sang a hymn over a hot stove is carrying in her cells the same mitochondrial DNA that the first mother of humanity carried. Every black grandfather in Detroit who ever sat on a porch with his hands folded telling stories to his grandbabies is walking around with bones shaped by the same African valleys that grew Lucy. Every young black child in Houston, in Atlanta, in Oakland, in the Bronx, in Memphis, in New Orleans, every one of them is the closest living relative to the first human beings who ever walked upright and looked up at the sky. That is not flattery. That is not a feel-good sentence somebody made up to make you proud. That is the genetics. That is the geology. That is the bones in the ground in Ethiopia and the skulls in the basements of European museums and the DNA in your own blood right this second. You are not a footnote in the story of humanity. You are the opening paragraph. You are the first chapter. Everybody else is a translation. And the next time somebody tries to tell you that black history starts with slavery, you can look them dead in the eye and tell them that black history started with the first heartbeat that ever beat in a human chest. And every heartbeat in every chest on this planet right now is a remix of that original African rhythm. So what do we do with all this? We pass it on. We tell our grandbabies before the schools get a chance to lie to them. We sit our nieces and nephews down at the kitchen table and we tell them about Lucy. We tell them about mitochondrial Eve. We tell them about the Awash Valley and the Great Rift and the Dogon star charts and the Benin bronzes locked up in London. We do not wait for somebody else to teach our children who they are. We teach them ourselves the same way our grandmothers taught us how to season a pot and our grandfathers taught us how to fix a leaky pipe. The knowledge gets passed hand to hand at the kitchen table because that is where black knowledge has always lived in this country. The schools were never going to give it to us straight. The museums were never going to hand it over. The television was never going to break the story on prime time. So we do it ourselves. We always have. That is the same backbone that got us through everything else. That backbone goes back to Lucy too. And here is the last piece. Africa is not a museum. Africa is not a graveyard for old bones. Africa is alive right now. Right now, while we are sitting here, there are scientists in Ethiopia and Kenya and South Africa who are digging up new finds every year that keep pushing the human story back further and further. There are universities in Ghana and Nigeria and Senegal teaching this material to African students who are growing up knowing exactly where they came from. There are museums in Cairo and Addis Ababa and Dakar reclaiming what belongs to them piece by piece. The The story is not over. The cover-up is cracking. The truth is coming up out of the ground faster than they can shovel dirt over it. And the generation of black children growing up right now, including yours, including mine, are going to be the first generation in 500 years to grow up knowing the real picture from the very beginning. That is the win. That is the long game. That is what every grandmother who ever prayed over a sleeping grandchild was praying for, whether she knew it or not. The truth coming home. The picture coming back. The face in the mirror finally matching the face in the history book. If this gave you something to chew on tonight, share it with the young ones in your family who need to hear it before the world tries to tell them something else. Drop me a comment and let me know if you ever heard about Lucy or mitochondrial Eve before today, because I want to see who is finding this out for the first time. And stay close, because there is a whole lot more of this picture we still have to bring back into the light.